So good evening, everyone. My name is Amy Skillman, and I'm director of the MA in Cultural Sustainability at Goucher College. I want to welcome you to the fourth of our 5 webinars that we have been offering this spring in our Chat Fest series. And before we begin, I just want to go over a couple of logistical things and reminders. We do have closed captioning. That's available by clicking the CC button at the bottom of your screen. If that's helpful to you, do that. We are recording. So if you prefer not to be on screen, please just turn off your video. That makes it simple. And probably just go ahead and keep your video off during the first 10, 15 minutes of this presentation and your microphone on mute so that there aren't any distractions for the very beginning. If a question does come up for you while you're listening to our speaker, please feel free to type it in the chat, and either Taylor, Sightsinger, or I will make sure that we ask it for you. Taylor, by the way, is our graduate student admissions counselor, and I will be sharing her email address and my email address in a few minutes in case you want to connect with either one of us about the program. We do call this series Chat Fest because the webinars are really designed as conversations or chats with some opening remarks by our guest speaker and then a moderated dialogue. So we do encourage you to chat with each other using that chat function. And if you like, you can go ahead and start by introducing yourself in the chat and saying something about why you're here. Now, tonight's conversation is as I said, part of this semester-long series, exploring the future of cultures, especially in this age of climate change and exploding digital technologies. And our final conversation for this semester will be with Maria Gabriela Aldana, who has been doing an oral history project with folks in the Baltimore Harbor area that have been impacted by the collapse of the Key Bridge just a little over a year ago. And she's including the surviving family members of the 6 men who lost their lives during that collapse. So on this screen, you'll see that I've given you a QR code that will take you directly to the page where you can register for that event, which is on April 22nd. Or you can register for any of the other events that our other grad programs are offering and just do a scan of them. And I think Taylor will also put the link in the chat so you can access it directly if that's easier for you. Now, if you have missed any of our past conversations, you can access them easily on our YouTube channel, which is Cultural Sustainability at Goucher College. And so we have recordings going back several semesters, and they're organized by playlist according to that semester. So you can go in and poke around and look at a number of different conversations and webinars that we've had over the last 3 or 4 years, maybe. So again, the QR code will take you there, but Taylor also has the link and will put that in the chat for you. And then just to reiterate that these webinars are sponsored by the MA in Cultural Sustainability here at Goucher College, and many of them align specifically with our courses, either as authors whose work we are reading in those courses or as guest speakers intended to engage with the students. So in fact, tonight's conversation aligns with our course on critical perspectives in community-based research, just taught by Barry Dornfeld, who you will meet in a few minutes. But here is a link, another QR code with a dinosaur on it, that will take you to the website for the MA in Cultural Sustainability if you're interested in learning more about the program. But also, as I said, I've included Taylor's email address and my email address in case you want to reach out to one of us. Taylor would be the good person to reach out to for admissions questions about the process, about the application. But then you can reach out to me if you have programmatic questions about our curriculum or our faculty or the format. Both of us can answer all of those questions, but feel free to reach out to one or the other as needed. So to our program for tonight. Oops, let me just zoom back in. In this decidedly digital age, we ask, what is the role of technology and media in our efforts to sustain cultures? What innovative ways are artists and cultural advocates incorporating ethnographic practices into creating public media that honors the evolving nature of our local communities? In this conversation with Naomi Sturm-Wijesinghe, we will discuss innovative approaches to multilingual cultural production and community-based understandings of technology use. Naomi is a public folklorist and ethnomusicologist by training, with more than 15 years of experience working at every level, from in small to mid-sized nonprofit arts organizations. Her specialties range from immigrant and urban place-based folk life to grassroots fundraising and nonprofit management. Naomi is the founding executive director of Los Herederos, a media arts organization that believes in the power and complexity of transmedia storytelling to educate and encourage a more culturally aware, equitable, and sustainable society. She is also the Creative Traditions Program Director for City Lore and an adjunct professor at the New School. It is her deeply held belief that local knowledge both sustains communities and advances the quality of everyday life. And I had an opportunity to hear Naomi talk about this work last week, and it's just really powerful and compelling. So I'm excited to have her here with us tonight. Moderating tonight is Dr. Barry Dornfeld, who teaches several courses in our graduate programs. Barry is a principal at CFAR, which is a management consulting firm in Philadelphia. He's also a documentary filmmaker, a media researcher, and an educator. His documentary work, much of it centers around expressive culture in the Philadelphia area, though he's done work elsewhere as well. And he's taught at New York University, and he has chaired the communication department at the University of the Arts in Philadelphia. So with that introduction, I will stop sharing my screen and turn it over to you, Barry.
Great, thank you.
And welcome, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everybody, for being on, and looking forward to tonight's conversation. It had been for a while, and when Amy and I were thinking about who to invite to join us for a session both relevant to our program overall and the work that we all do, and particularly the class that I'm teaching in critical perspectives, Naomi came right to mind as a great person who's doing really innovative, has done over a long time, really innovative work in our field, and I think has a view and a vision of the field that is really thoughtful and something we can all learn from. So we're really excited and honored and grateful that you could join us tonight, Naomi. I think Amy did a great introduction to Naomi. I won't say too much more because she'll also begin talking about her work, but will say briefly that, I'm honored to call Naomi a colleague and a friend. Got to collaborate with her quite a bit when she was in Philadelphia for several years, running the Philadelphia Folklore Project, and then working on other things. And again, the things that she's working on and thinking about, and the way she thinks about the possibilities in our field around community collaboration, around taking the sort of academic rigor and background that she has, but putting it to work for communities and with communities in a variety of places now, focused a bit on New York, I know, but you'll talk about that more broadly, I'm sure, is really quite thoughtful and innovative. And in particular, her interest in working across media. So something that I'm certainly excited about too. So we'll talk about that in terms of transmedia or multimedia, multimodal ways of communicating, but thinking about not only the work itself and how we engage with communities, but what the products are that we're creating, what access we're giving to people for about the stories that are being developed and the archival materials that are being developed, and thinking about that in a forward-thinking way as well. So welcome, everybody. Welcome to Naomi. Naomi's going to share some thoughts and some material with us to get started. Then I'll have a few questions for her, and then we'll open it up for everyone else. So we'll have ask you to be thinking of questions. Feel free to put stuff, ideas, questions, comments in the chat. And once we sort of go full conversation, we'd invite you to turn your cameras on so we can see everybody if you're able. So Naomi, do you want to share a little bit about your work and your background?
Sure. Thank you so much, Barry and Amy, for that wonderful introduction. And it's really, really a pleasure to be here with you all this evening. I think that, the introduction summarized quite a bit of my work and sort of where I'm coming from for this. I will say that in addition to my more formal training in public folklore and ethnomusicology and my on-the-ground training throughout my life in nonprofits, I also have I feel actually the privilege to have worked in several different industries and situations over the course of my life, which I say really have influenced my work as a public folklorist in equal parts. So that more formal training, but also the training that is our lives, right? And so that's something that I'm very proud of. And I also think is very relevant to my organization, Los Herederos. So what I'd like to do is just give a little introduction to Los Herederos in our work for about 10 minutes. I'm going to share screen with a PowerPoint and give you a little bit of a crash course on who we are and some of the ways that we tend to work. And then I think we'll transition to the conversation. And I look forward to, getting more deep into some of our methodologies, both whether that's working across media, as Barry was saying, or also our ways of approaching and working in and with community, which I know are also, a big focus of the class and of the MA program. So I'm going to go off camera for a moment. And I'm going to hopefully share the right screen. Let's see. Is that looking okay, Barry, in terms of the PowerPoint?
Yep.
That looks right.
Perfect. Yep. Thank you.
Wonderful. Hallelujah.
No, we've now lost the image for a second. I don't know if that was intentional or not. Oh, did we lose Naomi altogether? Oh, I think I don't see Naomi.
Yeah, I think we lost Naomi. Oh, no.
Oh, she
Let me
might
go
have
back
pushed the
to-
button, an unfortunate button. So if everybody
Oh,
wanted
no,
to hang in
yes.
for a minute, we had rehearsed this a few times, but
Yeah, I'm sure she'll be back.
technology is always interesting. So yeah, I'm sure she'll be back in a minute. So hang on if you would.
Yeah.
She was working with multiple devices and her external camera, so maybe.
So hopefully, do you have her? Let's see. I'm trying. Oh, here she comes.
Back in, yeah. Okay, you see her. Great.
Okay. Now you're muted, Naomi, but welcome back.
Okay. Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Okay.
So now share screen again.
Yeah, we don't see your screen right now.
Let's not lose you.
Let me not get booted again.
Yep.
Let's see.
Okay, we see the image now in a smaller version of the deck. Yep.
There we go.
Perfect.
We are here. Okay.
Yes.
Take two. in transmedia ethnography. So I just want to start out by locating Los Herederos a little bit for you. Los Herederos is a community-based media arts and folk art organization. We are a nonprofit, and we are based in Queens, New York. We do work citywide in New York City. We also do work across the United States, and in many cases, transnationally or internationally as well, primarily not because we're an international organization, but because we're a Queens organization. And, for those who may be more or less familiar, Queens, New York is, I think, still the densest cross-section of ethnic and linguistic diversity in the United States for many, many years running. And so we work not exclusively, but largely with immigrant communities and immigrant folk arts. And a lot of those projects have naturally a transnational focus. And as we said before, Los Herederos engages in research-based documentation for what we call public consumption, and we produce projects, programs, and services that address the realities of local culture, evolving communities, and an increasingly complex and multi-layered immigrant experience. We believe in the power and the complexity of transmedia storytelling to educate and encourage a more culturally aware, equitable, and sustainable society. Central to our creative strategy is our interdisciplinary approach to ethnography. Our ethnographic practice is both observant of our surroundings and reflective of our own experience as Native New Yorkers and immigrant artists. As inheritors of the city, we look to build infrastructure in our communities, thereby naming our stake in their cultural futures. So I want to talk for a moment also about our name, Los Herederos. Los Herederos means the inheritors in Spanish, and so that's why you hear in our mission this idea of also being inheritors of the city. Not that Los Herederos and our staff are exclusively so, but we approach our work from a very local and sort of homegrown community-based perspective. And so we are often thinking about not just the preservation of tradition, but as I know is very important in a program like this, the sustainability of traditions and who's inheriting those traditions, where are we going as a society, and at the local level, how can we take charge of that? We also decided to name ourselves Los Herederos versus the Inheritors. Again, not because we are an exclusively Latinx or Latine serving organization. We do serve very diverse Latino populations in New York City, but we serve many other ethnic and linguistic and cultural and religious groups in Queens as well. But we did want to make a statement about multilingualness and being bilingual in a place like New York. And in the United States at large, we really feel that we do live in a very bilingual society, whether it's formally regarded that way or not. And so, we felt that it was sort of a playful thing in a way to say Los Herederos and then have people ask that question of, oh, so are you a Spanish language folklore organization? And we say, no, just because our name is in Spanish doesn't mean we only serve, just the way if your name is in English, you don't necessarily only serve English speaking populations. So that was intentional on our part. And our slogan, Inheriting Culture in the Digital Age, kind of brings us back, in a bilingual space to really what is a focus. And I know, as Amy was saying in our introduction, one of the things that Los Herederos is very concerned with is how to harness new technologies or current day technologies to work with traditional culture and a lot of practices that are not typically necessarily married with technology, but also to think about technology as a cultural practice, right? And so communities use technology in different and diverse ways and have traditions around the use of technology. And so sort of all of the above is very central to the way that Los Herederos works. And so, as I mentioned before, in our mission, we're very clear that our strength and our area of work is in this interdisciplinary approach to ethnography, or, again, we could think of something more of like a multimodal approach or, something like that. But we bring together different fields. We are very much a public folklore organization, but we are also a media arts organization. And we often say that we're sort of sitting at the nexus of public art that's socially engaged, a public interest folk life approach, and then also this idea of cultural sustainability at large. And we're bringing those things together to do a couple of key things. One is access to educational media. So we produce, whether that's media publications or films or podcasts or radio or, all kinds of different media, but it's all produced free and meant to demystify ethnography for sort of the general population, because oftentimes really refined ethnographic work gets stuck for a variety of reasons in academia. And for us, we felt like working in a transmedia or a multimedia approach really allowed us to make that educationally accessible to larger populations. Within that, we also do a lot of community archiving. So that's what we mean by community-driven digital collections. The archive is really at the heart of what Los Herederos does. We always say that the archive starts at the beginning of a project, not necessarily at the end. It's not just documenting what you did and putting it into an archive, but actually having an archive that tells stories of community and can be regularly activated as such is programmatic work in and of itself. Also, when working with technology, we're always thinking about how to use technology to allow creatives and community groups to have greater voice and platform and amplification for the work that they're doing. So we'll talk a little bit more about the contraption you see behind here, our Sani cycle, but we're always thinking about how to propel forward the work in our communities through the technology. We also work very closely. I mean, we really don't work without community. We are actually, all of the Los Herederos team are from Queens, New York. We are embedded in neighborhoods where we either grew up or immigrated to at a relatively young age. And we are always thinking, in the same way that we make ethnographic work accessible to our communities, we're always thinking about how to engage people in the process of the doing of the ethnography, in the process of the creating of the archives. And so that's what we mean when we say engage and empower local people through collaborative community-centered documentation and autoethnography. We are often leading educational programs that teach cultural documentation, that teach ethnography, that encourage people to consider their own lives through an ethnographic lens, that are, community archiving days where people can come and be interviewed or interview each other or contribute, family photographs or home videos or things like that to projects. So we're always thinking about how the archive, we always say the archive can be the party, right? So how can this process of doing documentation, doing community storytelling, creating archives in community be a really fun and socially powerful activity? And the other thing that has very organically developed from our work as well is that we're often thinking about what can art and folklore and media do in our communities. So I think for me, what has drawn me to folklore, folk life, and public folklore work in my life is the very profound reality that it's art, but it's never art simply for the sake of art, right? Folk art is by definition art with a purpose. It always has another reason. And so we try to really embody that in our work. And, for our communities, often mutual aid projects or certain types of economic development that is really community-centered versus development and other kinds of sort of gentrifying displacement focus, which is very common in a place like New York City in 2025. We're always thinking about how do we put folk art and put storytelling to work in ways that are beneficial to our communities. And so just in terms of the scope of our work, I'm going over it sort of as an overview for you. We're not going to be able to go into everything today, but as I mentioned, we work very deeply with archives, multimedia archives. We do a lot of projects that are educational in nature, as I mentioned, whether those are community documentation and training programs or, different kinds of active initiatives with some of our inventions like the Sani cycle. We provide a lot of services. So another thing that Los Herederos does is we work with community organizations and other like-minded groups to do different kinds of production contracts at very reduced rates that allow small organizations and individuals to propel their work forward with some of our skill set. We create a lot of cultural content and, as I said before, have education. And so these are just some samples. One of the things that I do want to share and talk to you about today a little bit is the Sani cycle, because I think that's a really unique way of working with media and communities. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. We have a number of different collections that are part of our community archiving initiatives, but one flagship one, which I actually was presenting on at an event where Amy was last weekend, or week, I should say, at the Library of Congress, is our Documenting and Resistance collection. This was a collection about Jackson Heights, which is a neighborhood in Queens where we are located, a public plaza there that has been under threat for redevelopment and a variety of other things, but is a really unique community space. And so we created a transmedia or multimodal collection that is dedicated to why Diversity Plaza matters on so many different levels to different people. And that is both deposited with Library of Congress, but also lives with the organization and in the community for use by local businesses and organizers and artists alike. Creative Masters is an example of our web publications. One of our really key methodologies, which I keep throwing the term around over the years, has been to work in what we call a transmedia format. Some people are more comfortable with the term multimedia or multimodal work, but what we mean when we say a transmedia format is to tell dynamic stories across multiple medium at the same time. So we have a number of different publications that, like Creative Masters, will have a written piece, often in more than one language, or translated, I should say. It will have snippets of ethnographic interviews. It will have a really high quality audio recording of a concert by an artist. It'll have a video interview or performance by said artist. And this stuff doesn't repeat. So it's not like you have the story in all these different formats. They're actually working together. And I know that our website is being shared in the chat, and you can go on at your leisure and look at some of these publications to get a sense about that transmedia methodology that we have. But we did that because it comes back to that mission of wanting to make ethnographic storytelling accessible to the public on a really broad level. And our feeling was that the more ways you tell a story, the more ways you make it accessible. Ethnographic writing is very powerful for a certain audience, but for other audiences, having the actual interview played back with some interpretive elements is more powerful. Other people learn better visually. And also for artists, having really high quality documentation of their work that's presented in this way also has a really profound impact on how they're able to tell their stories in their own voice, kind of from the roots up, and also show what they do, right? Not necessarily have the need for someone else to explain it entirely. So that's been really fundamental over the years to how we've developed our work. Our Dream Tellers Documentary Institute is an example of a community scholars program. We have taught and designed a number of different ones. This one was really to work with dreamers, and by dreamers, I mean, 1.5 or first generation immigrants who were brought to the United States as children and have grown up without legal documentation, but certainly as members of American society. And so that institute taught dreamers how to use documentary storytelling to create impactful short films in their communities, and often for activist purposes as well. And the final here is LH Radio. So one of the most recent occurrences for Los Herederos in the past year actually is that we opened our first brick and mortar space. We never had a physical space before, and we don't need it for all of our programs. We are very media and virtual kind of organization, but over the past couple of years, it became clear that in our neighborhoods in Queens, space was really starting to come at a premium. We couldn't find space to do programs and exhibits when we wanted to, and neither could our colleagues and our friends and our community. And so we were able to join forces with a program in the MTA and actually open an exhibit, a small gallery and community radio station inside of the subway station in Jackson Heights. And so with that, we launched LH Radio, which has become another means for, it's another platform for media storytelling in our communities. And so before we break and sort of dig in a bit deeper into some of our methodologies and conversations in ways that I, hope you'll all join in and ask what would be meaningful for you, I did want to come back to this one other flagship invention we have, which is our Sani cycle. And this is her, and she is a contraption that is artist designed by the Los Herederos creative team. And wears many hats. As you can see, the Sani cycle is a small cart that can actually attach to a bicycle. So it's mobile. It's a mobile sound system. It has turntables in the back, but it also has a recording equipment inside that can be used for doing interviews and different types of community documentation. And the other thing the Sani cycle has is that it's an amplification system, so it can travel around and make announcements, it can participate in parades and different things like that. And the inspiration for the Sani cycle is really folklore or folk life at work. So if you go, really, I think there's examples of this all over the world, but certainly in Latin America, where a lot of our founding members are from originally, these traveling sound systems are a part of everyday life. They're like how people make announcements. They're when parties happen that are open air. It's where the music comes from. Whoop. I want to actually stop sharing my screen now for a moment. Okay. And so we thought, how could we take the idea of a traveling sound system, which in a country like Colombia might be called a pico, or in Mexico, for example, you have a sonidero culture. And how could we take that idea, that cultural technology that exists, but repurpose it to the best of our ability for our communities in Queens? And so our solution was to actually develop this Sani cycle that was both a traveling sound system, but also a means for community documentation. And that would allow us to work with the community at a mobile, sort of everyday street level. And at the same time, we'd let the community work with us. So the really cool thing about the Sani cycle, and why I think it may be of interest here for this conversation, is that it really turns the curatorial eye of ethnography away from the ethnographer, or like the professional, which in this case would be Los Herederos or any of we have a 6-person team. And so we do a lot of our own documentation. We obviously are experts in that work in our own ways, but it's really important to us that other people guide the camera sometimes, and other people neighbors interview each other and have conversations that we could never have because the vibe is different, or we don't know them like that, or things like that. And I think that there's always sort of a goal for that in ethnography, particularly when you're doing it in a public space, but actually decentering the professional ethnographer is really tricky. And it's not even easy for us. So I don't say like we've cracked the code and it's all perfect, but the Sani cycle has really been at the heart of how we interact with community and how community approach us. Because as you can see, it's colorful. There's a DJ, there's records, there's easy to use equipment. And so kids come up to it and they're like, what's this space machine? Can I touch it? And adults come up and say, oh, I have that record. When I came from Nepal, 50 years ago, I arrived with that record, and oh, I have it at home. Can I go home and get it? Can I bring it back? I want to show you what my mom wrote to me when she gave me that record before I left. And then that becomes the interview, right? And then they can actually try out the record. So there's all these layers of community and conversation that have become possible due to thinking a little bit outside the box in how we use technology, how we use a community-centered ethnographic approach, but also how we embody folk life, right? How we take something like a cultural technology. It doesn't all have to be Adobe Premiere and, you know, fancy 4K cameras, right? Technology can also just be thinking about, you know, how we interact with a turntable and records and as a conversation starter. And so, you know, the Sani cycle, I think, really encapsulates that for Los Herederos and our team. And it's something that, as I said, our well, currently 6-person team, but really fluctuating over the years. We've had so much help and support from so many different creatives, colleagues. And everyone has had a hand in the Sani cycle, whether it was the design, the painting, the lifting out of a basement in Queens. She's not as light as we would like her to be, you know, the pedaling of her, which my co-founder and co-director Mauricio does, you know, most often. But everyone has had a hand in the Sani cycle and in the documentation that we're able to do. And so I'll end with that. And you know, I have a couple, you know, of different categories of our work that I think kind of encapsulate our methodologies. And so we can talk more about that. But I think I'll pass it over to Barry for,
Great.
you know, questions for now.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Naomi. Fantastic overview, and more than an overview, really a rich covering of what the organization is and does, and some of the projects and methodologies you use. So, yeah, I'm going to just start with a few questions and then open it up to others to join in. So, you know, if you have questions, we'll get to them very quickly, or thoughts or comments. But no, I love what you shared, and no, I love the focus both on collaboration and on digital media, and the point about it not having to be, you know, the cutting edge, but it has to, but thinking about media and technologies that serve your purpose of engaging communities in the way you do, and but also thinking about, you know, the history of technology through our disciplines, you know, and sort of my mind flashed back to, you know, Alan Lomax, you know, and his father sort of putting the big you know, recorders in the back of the station wagon driving through the South, or, you know, people who are handing out Polaroid cameras in Appalachia and working with communities to document their own lives, or early video technology. So there's fascinating sort of history of these things, and you've taken them into the sort of current moment in a really interesting way. I guess where one area that I'd love to hear you talk more about is, you know, sort of when you think about a collaborative project, and you made the point in covering in the mission statement that your work is community driven, but at the same time you raised, you know, the complexity around that as, you know, sort of professional folklorists, ethnographers, media makers, you know, who might have their own skills and agenda and things they want to look at and work with. How do you think about sort of the sort of sourcing and originating of a project? You know, where do these ideas sort of come from? Do they come from you and then out to the community, or do they come from the community to you? You know, how do you think about funding, of course, and that, you know, made all the more complex by the current attacks on funding that we all sort of rely on. And, you know, we don't go there if everybody wants to, but don't have to necessarily go there yet. But then also when you you know, sort of engage with the community, who you engage with, who you interact with from the community, what roles they play, and then even, you know, on the sort of, you know, thinking about it linearly, when the work is shared, you know, how do you think about that piece of it in collaboration with community members? So I know that's a lot. Pick up whatever of that you want. Just want to get under a little bit more what that community collaboration looks like from your perspective.
Sure. So maybe I'll tackle the first part of what you said, and then you can remind me
Okay,
for
a
that.
long question. Yeah, sure.
But in terms of how we work with community and whether community approaches us, or where ideas and inspirations for work comes from, you know, it is a mix. And I think it's a mix because it's really a very organic process for us, and we try to be intentional about that. But all of our work is somehow connected to either an artist or an individual or, from the community approaching us with a need or an idea or a community organization, or us as ethnographers. And when I say ethnographers, again, I really mean that on a very organic level. I mean, I have formal training in that. Not all of our co-founders and staff do. A lot of our staff come from other fields such as film or sound tech and recording, or just other fields entirely, like construction or management of buildings, or I mean, really runs the gamut. Los Herederos' staff is very diverse culturally and ethnically, but it's also very, very diverse in terms of the skill sets and the talents that people bring, and the life experiences that people come from. And so, we were intentional about that. We really built ourselves from the roots up. And so because of that, I like to think we really do have our finger on the pulse of a lot of different things, because we have different team members, right, who are bringing in different ideas, have different relationships. So there's like a web of that, in our communities, and we are a local organization. And so sometimes, we observe things or we hear about things, or there's a current event or an issue. For example, the Diversity Plaza project. I mean, we had been working in that plaza for many, many years. We had watched the neighborhood go up and down with COVID. Jackson Heights was one of the hardest hit neighborhoods in New York City and in the country. We were very close with several people who all claim to be founders of that plaza. So you can already imagine the layers of community there. But I mean, we were sort of integrated into this space. And then we realized that there was really a question about how this place was being documented, whether it was being documented, whether it would be, a place that would get bulldozed and taken away from community use. I mean, there were many things going on. So the idea for the archive project came from us, but it was really based from years of really deep listening in the community and thinking about things. And then, we put that idea up against community. So we asked a lot of different stakeholders what they thought of it, whether they would want to participate in a project like that. We held certain meetings, town halls, things like that. And the answer was yes, right? So that was one example of how we decided to work with community. But other times, we've had an artist come in and say, my teacher is elderly and going to pass, and no one has ever done anything with them, and I would really like to see them be a part of a publication or a program that you're doing. We've had organizations come to us and say, we do a lot of organizing, but we don't know how to do radio storytelling. We'd like to have a show on the radio, so it's very iterative, and like people, I would say the vast majority is like community members coming to us and saying, here's what we need. And then together we're finding a creative solution. And sometimes, we're part of the community. It's having a cool idea and saying, what do you think of this? Right. So it's a dialogue. It goes back and forth, as I think, life does. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. And I imagine part of that as well is working with existing organizations in the communities you work in. So it's not just individuals. Are there other organizations that you're collaborating with? And
100%.
Yeah.
So we work with a lot of other nonprofit organizations in New York City. We also work with a lot of community businesses and sort of what we would call, or I think actually City Law probably coined this term, but like community anchors, right? So like Terraza Siete, which is a bar and music venue that is sadly actually in danger of closing next month, but has for 30 years been a place for jazz and Latin music and sort of new immigrant music coming out of Queens, right? So it's a business, but we have worked very closely with them over the years. There's a local bookstore, right, that has been the site of a lot of different community cultural organizing movements and things like that. We have a close relationship with them. We have a close relationship with Queens Public Library, which is obviously a very large entity, right? So we work, and we your question about funding and fundraising, I mean, we are intentional about that too. We have people we work with that are kind of in our, we're all in an ecosystem, right? And so in some cases, Los Herederos is a helping hand. In other cases, another entity is a helping hand. And I think it's all, especially in times like this where money is actually getting harder and harder to come by, being sensitive to that ecosystem and thinking about how you can be helpful, but also how you can be strategic and work with people that can be helpful to you is all the more important. We get funding from traditional places that are public and private, but we're small and we're growing. We're barely 10 years old, right? So um, we're in that build, and we're caught in the now, which doesn't need any explanation, but we also were caught in COVID. We were caught in the being a grassroots seed project that was completely volunteer for 5+ years. I mean, we've sort of done, I always say we've done magic with nothing. We've had very little in terms of funds, but we're building that, but we're also thinking very much outside the box of just traditional fundraising, because it's what we've had to do so far, and I think it's what we probably have to continue to do in the near future.
Yeah, great. And I'll ask one more question, and then I'll open it up because I know time is going to move on. I also love the way you think about the archive, and the archive can be the party. It's a great phrase that I wrote down. But just thinking about the archive as a place where in our work we can really bring a set of skills and understandings, but also sort of pull out material that the community has already placed some real value on, whether it's stuff they generated or stuff others generated, and sort of bring that to life in a way, versus the idea, and I know it actually might have been even one of your teachers who wrote an article saying something like, we're all archivists now, right? We don't need as many ethnographers out there doing more documentation. There's so much stuff that's been documented. How do we sort of take what's in the archive and give it life, whether it's older material or more contemporary material? Any stories you can share about taking material and making it accessible either in a transmedia format or on the web, or even just pointing people to stuff that exists and you've now kind of given more sustainability to? It'd be interesting to hear.
Yeah. So activating the archive, and making sure that our archives are really functional in our community. That's another thing we talk a lot about, having a functional archive. It's really, really important to Los Herederos. And I think we do that in different ways. I think a good example actually is with our Diversity Plaza collection, with this Library of Congress project. We collected a really robust and multimedia collection about the plaza, and then we sent it to the library. And actually, the turnaround on it is pretty quick for for the People's Library, right? But for a federal agency, it's only going to be a few years before that stuff's online, so that's great. But we had to really, from the get-go, think about how we were going to keep that momentum and the interest in that archive alive in our communities, because for us, hearing that the archive will be online in 2 years is like, oh, great. But for a shop owner who was really excited about having his store in the Library of Congress, that's a mini eternity. And he might be an older man, and he doesn't know if his shop will even be here when it gets online, right? So there is that piece as well. It's very real. And in New York City, I mean, the change is the only constant. So like immediacy stuff, I mean, because of the way technology moves, but also because of the way the city moves, we have to be very aware of that, because we lose people and we don't do our job. We don't end up serving people properly. And so we're doing a couple things. We're also trying to figure out how to have that collection on our website in maybe a shorter term turnaround, but even that takes some time. And so, one of the things we did actually with the support of Library of Congress was we had an exhibition when we opened our space in the subway station that was connected. That subway station is part of Diversity Plaza, and actually that work fed into that happening. And so we had a multimedia exhibit that opened and kind of presented the plaza within the plaza, which was kind of interesting, right? So you had people in Diversity Plaza coming in to re-experience the stories of Diversity Plaza.
Great.
Another way we do that actually is with our radio. So, we have a lot of radio shows that are based on archival materials that we have. We bring people back in to listen to stuff, to be interviewed. And so, that's another way. So I think those are, probably
Yeah.
two examples. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll invite others to jump in. Questions, comments, things you'd like to hear more from Naomi about. Feel free to come on camera if you can.
I'm just so impressed with everything that you're doing, Naomi. I mean, in 10 years' time, you really built, it feels like a really robust community centered entity. I'm just really excited about that. Yeah.
I'll say I did not do it alone,
Yeah.
by any means. And yeah, 10 years of incorporation, but many lifetimes of work and people have come together to make Los Herederos possible.
Mm-hmm.
Heather, do you want to jump in? Hi there. You want to share a question or a comment?
Yeah, thanks, Barry, and thank you, Naomi. That was just really exciting for me to hear. One of the questions, and actually you alluded to it when you were talking, I wonder if you could talk more about this idea of decentering the professional ethnographer and what that's like, how you might go about that, and maybe even some lessons learned you could share.
Yeah. So, we're always thinking critically about power dynamics in this work. And I think that in the modern era, many social sciences are, right? It's a necessary consideration because there's so much beauty and power in this work. But like all fields, there are also really unhealthy power dynamics, which you can kind of forget about because even if the work is coming from a good place, but it's coming through a person with certain privilege and power often, right? And that's there, and it colors everything, right? And so there's been movements in anthropology and in public folklore in these fields, with other ways of thinking about ethnography, whether that's like autoethnography or community-based ethnography, all these different things. Like we come up with fancy words that they're related, and a lot of them are saying the same thing. But that, in terms of, and I know that that's really important to a lot of public folklore organizations, right? Taking this work outside of academic spaces, working in communities. And then in doing that, yeah, you often have staff that are trained in these areas, but because you're outside of an academic space, you have more freedom with how you might be working with people. You're often in spaces where you can teach that work, right? And that work can be taught in ways that aren't, just for people in a master's program, right? Or doing higher education. So I think examples of the way Los Herederos has tackled that have been programs with the Sani Cycle that I mentioned, are different types of community scholars programs we've done. And we've often partnered with even like other institutions, like most recently with Arts Westchester, which is the Arts Council in Westchester County. They brought Los Herederos in as a partner to develop a curriculum for their community scholars program. And we've over the years, we've thought about how do you teach this work to people that are interested but are not going to be pursuing higher education. Maybe the goals for the work are other. Obviously, when you're doing this work in your own community of practice, it's just very different than whether you're working as like a generalist or doing like survey work. So we often think that our big thing is we always say there's just not a one size fits all way of doing this work. It's really important. Like even for us, we have the Sani Cycle. We have ways that we teach people to do ethnography with cell phones and cell phone cameras and sort of everyday technologies. We have approaches to doing, interviews that allow them to be more, dialogic, or don't mean that we're like asking all the questions or things like that. But even then, every time we approach a new community project, we kind of put all that to the side for a minute and we say, yes, we have a toolkit that we could draw from, but what is this community need, or what does this project need? And oftentimes it involves the creation of like a new methodology, or a new way of doing that. And so we really try to be critical of ourselves, and the process, sort of like as an exercise, as a workout, in the work that we're doing. So I think, those are some examples, but yeah, we try to make sure that, we're not always the person making the decisions about the shots and the questions and things like that. That being said, I also don't want to, I think it's very important. I think we were talking before, like this idea of like, are we all archivists, or are we all ethnographers? And I also want to like backpedal that just a little bit as well, because I think that, it's not to say there isn't real value in professional training in ethnography or in documentation or these things. And sometimes, we come up against, the attitude of that anyone can do what you do. Oh, yes, anyone can have a radio show. Well, yes, on LH Radio, anyone can have a radio show if they can come up with a proposal, if they can prepare, if they can send in things, right? So there's a making things accessible, but there's also, it doesn't necessarily mean dumbing things down, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean saying, throw out the window all the finer points of certain types of training, because training to work with people is not a joke, right? Like, and I will say that, like, having trained many, many people in my life to go out into the field, I think sometimes people make too light of that, and it's very serious business. In a way that, people work in therapeutic situation, all different kinds of, I mean, nobody just runs out and just, well, you can do harm to people too, right? Like, it's not just all anyone can do, but we're always thinking about how to break things down so that they're more approachable to more people. Yeah.
I love that. The complexity that you speak to there, because even in the course that we're referencing that I'm teaching now, but many of us here, the faculty, mostly here, has helped shape on, critical perspectives. We've wrestled with even, how much to focus on and even use the word ethnography. Was that, now a kind of, tainted concept or not? And, we decided to lean into it, but also to think about reinventing it and, recasting it, and including community-driven perspectives. So I think you've captured that tension well. And I think just having that professional training and even the space to do the work, something that communities don't always have. People are doing other things, they're making livings, and they might not have the time and space to even devote to these important pursuits. So that alone is a resource to bring to the community's needs. Yeah, Sue.
So I put a note in the chat after I misspelled Herederos because I have a finger that's acting up. I apologize. But so I've been privileged to work with Naomi and with Los Herederos, with Southern Ohio Folklife, not only as a board member, but as a, I forget what my name was, Naomi, but there was a group of us that were kind of a
You were a steering committee member.
Steering committee, yeah. And one of the things I just want to add, in addition to the points that Naomi just made about kind of professionalism offering some real benefits and the training offering some real benefits, is also just the perspectives that you get. So we did a couple of great projects with the Latinx community. And one of the things that Los Herederos brought in is this idea of kind of soundscapes. So I've done a lot of ethnography in my life, but I have not made podcasts before. And I have not thought about what are the sounds of community in addition to the voices. And so I just want to give a shout out to Naomi and her team's work in that, because it's an additional perspective that we may not get when we do the traditional ethnographic training. So thank you for that.
Great. Thanks, Sue. Other questions, comments?
I do if
Go ahead, Amy.
Adolfo doesn't, or Zarita, or anybody else. Well, no, I just was I was thinking about examples of sustaining culture through technology. And the one example that you mentioned was the woman or the artist who said that they really wanted somebody to document their teacher, right? Whatever happened with that? Did that actually get done? And I mean, that seems like a really good example of at least sustaining the stories of somebody who was an important individual in a community. So my first part of my question is what happened with that project, and the second is, are there other examples of more kind of direct examples of sustaining culture through technology?
Yeah, so that project did happen, and actually, so it became the basis for another one of those creative masters profiles. So we
Mhm.
ended up doing a publication on this maestra, this master artist, and it became a transnational endeavor because it meant working with that community group to actually bring that artist from Colombia to New York. That was something they were already planning to do, but being a nonprofit, we were able to assist with the visa process and the invitation and things like that. And then we were able to also document, and that's very much what Creative Masters is about, is it's about master artists, but it's specifically about artists from abroad who come and perform in New York for the first time, and thinking about like what that experience is like, because New York
Mhm.
is a place, New York City is a place that so many people, all kinds of artists come and like to play there for the first time is an experience. And so um, that was what happened with that project, and it also became part of our community archives. And hopefully we've seen this going forward. Even we have artists that we documented very naturally at the time who very tragically are not with us anymore in a very
Mhm.
short span. And we're really happy that we have those materials, because I mean, even for their funerals, right? Being able to
Yeah. Wow.
pull and activate those archives. That's an experience that I've had at a few organizations, and actually with Barry, and also the board members of the Philadelphia Folklore Project. We lost, and Amy, you were close as well. I knew the family as well. We lost a Hmong tradition bearer,
Yeah.
Pang Sheng, while I was there. And again, the archive was really key to being able to lift up some of those stories, like with the family,
Mhm.
and just do some unique projects, which weren't
True.
necessarily nonprofit projects. They were just community needs,
Yeah.
right? But I
Mhm.
think that's an example of how some of this stuff gets wrapped up in cultural sustainability, because it's there for people, and it's also there for people to learn from when these people are not with us anymore, physically anyway. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Oh,
Well, yeah, and I think in that case of Peng Xiong, I feel like um, seeing seeing that again also re-energized the family and the community about those traditions, which is
Mhm.
another kind of way, another one of those sort of indicators of sustainability, right? Yeah.
yeah, definitely. No.
Yeah. So
Adolfo.
Adolfo.
Yeah, yeah, please.
Yeah, I just had one question. So I don't know much about I don't live in New York. I live in Asheville, but just based on the things that I've read in New York, it seems like whatever it is that we're calling folk culture or community culture in New York, right? Because I like, for example, um is inherently tied to urbanism, right? And the reason why I'm saying that is because, like, for example, like I mean, I've read books about like Robert Moses, or about, like, for example, like Washington Square Park and that kind of stuff. And it's like and I know you just spoke about gentrification. Like, at what point is this also about coming to grips with like the nature of like like urban planning in the city and how the city, I guess like how folks are segregated in the city. And at what point are you like at what point are you capturing like at what point is there like a separation between like capturing the way the city is planned and like community life in the city?
Well, I mean, I would say that we don't really make a separation like that in our documentation. I mean, I think that that's you've kind of hit the nail on the head in the sense that that's a part of the story that we're often telling, which is community life interacting with the urban planning, but also so many other forces in New York that aren't even as clear and formal as like the Robert Moses plan for New York City or current, even like, I mean, developers now have plans. And in some projects, like the Diversity Plaza project, I mean, we're thinking really very clearly about those things because the project is putting ethnography and the archive and the documentation of community life in direct action, right, against some of those plans, right? That's a very like urban planning kind of project. But in other cases, that may not be the focus. I mean, gentrification is not the focus of every project that we do, but it's always, but it's a part of it, right? Because New York is a place that is increasingly hard for regular people to live in because of what the costs are. I think in all organizations and all people that work with urban folk life, there's always this question of, you know, a lot of times you also have traditions that are coming, they're rural traditions, or they're traditions that are coming from totally different environments and are being figured out in an urban place. That's very common. And actually, something that was really interesting for us when working with the organization that Sue brought up, Southern Ohio Folklife, was comparing and contrasting immigration stories and narratives and cultural sustainability with very similar populations in New York City and Appalachian Ohio. So very, very different spaces, right? And that was both a learning experience for us and also, I think, an example of some of the things you're bringing up, Adolfo, is like, you know, I don't know at what point, you know, we try to think holistically about these things. But you know, part of the story is the fact that we're often working with traditional music that comes from rural or agricultural places, and it's being redeveloped in New York City by people from those places, kind of, but also sometimes like maybe from Columbia, but not from rural Columbia, but people coming to New York and then wanting to reconnect with being Colombian. And then it's a very rich story. And I think one thing that when we started Los Herederos, I'll end with this, that we talked a lot about was sometimes the narrative around how people arrive at tradition in our field of public folklore in the United States, it gets a little stuck, and it's not really anyone's fault. It happens for many reasons. It happens because of training. It happens because of funding. It happens because it's really hard to figure these things out and understand. Sometimes you need a narrative you can repeat over and over for something, and you have to come up with it. But like one thing that really I struggled with as a young person doing this work was that the way I was taught to tell stories of traditional artists in New York just did not match the actual narratives of people's lives. It kind of graded out. It kind of moved away from the fact that they weren't from the authentic place, or the, you know, I mean, that was a tension sometimes, not always, but sometimes. And so when we started Los Herederos, we said, let's make our own organization so that we can be free of some of these formats a little bit. Because those formats work really well and have worked well historically, but we're at a moment where this stuff is getting really messy and it's getting really mixed up. And we'd like to talk about traditions that are formed from cultures in contact in Queens. We'd like to talk about, you know, this kind of tension between, you know, a tradition that's been displaced and reimagined and like all of that, right? And but bring that into the public realm. And so, that was really important to us. But my answer to you is that it's a learning process, and we're always figuring it out. And like people, it's very multi-layered and complicated. So it's not a black and white thing. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
That's great.
Great question, Adolfo, and thanks.
Yeah.
Answer, Naomi. Yeah. So I think we're going to move to close. And I want to first thank Naomi for this great presentation and thoughtful conversation, and a lot to think about from tonight going forward. And then Amy, hand it to you to close us out.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, Barry, thank you so much for moderating this conversation, and Naomi, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your beautiful program and projects with us, and taking the time to be with us tonight. I really appreciate it. We will post a recording of this on our YouTube channel so that you can come look at it later. I will send a link to Barry, to you and Naomi in particular, so you have it. And then just a reminder that next week on the 22nd, so next Tuesday night, we have that conversation with Maria Gabriela Aldana about the Key Bridge collapse and the impact of that on culture in Baltimore Harbor. So thank you all for being with us tonight. And Naomi, thank you again for sharing your time and your insights. And yeah, this is great, really great.
Yeah.
All right.